Well, good morning or good afternoon, everyone, wherever in the country you happen to be. My name is Carmen Mazzera, and I'm so pleased to welcome you to another webinar for the Public and International Service Advisor, or PISA, network. Through the APSIA lens, and I serve as APSIA's Executive Director, we are very proud to be the home of the PISA network, which provides opportunities for community college and undergraduate advisors to just learn more about how they can bring public and international service opportunities to their students on campus, as well as build up a community advisors who have that great knowledge that they can bring out into their communities. I am particularly pleased to welcome our colleagues from the Department of Treasury here today, who are going to talk to us about some of the fantastic opportunities that they provide for your students, some of which you may know well, some of which may be new for the first time. So I really encourage you to ask your questions and to draw out all of their wisdom during this session. As we go, if you have any technical issues, please feel free to contact me or my amazing colleague, Brittany Chor, who put this webinar together and to whom I'm very grateful. If you have questions for our panelists, please feel free to put those in the chat, and we will be able to take those after the presentation. So again, I encourage you to use this opportunity to build up your understanding and get all of those great questions answered so that you can bring these wonderful opportunities to your students all across the US. And with that, I'm very pleased to turn the floor over to our colleagues at Treasury in one of those fabled Treasury building conference rooms, and we'll be able to get started. Please.
Thank you. Thank you, Carmen. Thank you, Brittany, for putting this all together, and thank you very much for inviting us to speak to PISA today. My name is Kim Richards, and I work in the Business Office, International Affairs. I do recruitment for junior fellows, which we're going to talk about this afternoon, and also for international economists. And I'm joined with two of my colleagues.
My name is Samantha McInnes. I'm the Director of Operations for the Financial Stability Oversight Council that is housed here in Treasury.
Hi, everyone. My name is Ria Jane, and I'm a current junior fellow, and so you'll get to hear a little bit more about what I and other junior fellows do in this presentation.
Okay. So what we're going to talk about today, the agenda is who we are, what we do, and the Junior Fellows Program specifically, and then we're going to follow up with a Q&A. And I believe that you're going to be writing your questions, I think, in the chat, and then at the end of the program, we're going to go through and answer those. So please ask away. So international affairs at which we call IA at Treasury, our mission is to protect and support the U.S. economic prosperity by strengthening the external environment for U.S. growth. So although we're working externally, our primary goal is U.S. growth and preventing and mitigating global financial instability and managing key global challenges. And we also we're going to talk about FSOC.
Sure. So the FSOC is a newer relative, especially to IA, newer office here. And it came out of the last financial crisis, and it's really designed to bring all the heads of financial regulatory agencies together. So the secretary is the chairperson of the council, but also seated on the council are the heads of the Fed, the SEC, FDIC, CFTC, all of the big hitters in financial regulation, also some state representatives as well. So we're really charged with helping safeguard the financial stability of the United States.
It's a big job. Okay, and this is just a quick overview of IA. So we're located in the main Treasury building, which is pretty cool. We're in the White House complex, right in downtown DC. And we have, in addition to international economists within our building, we also staff the U.S. Executive Director offices in the multilateral development banks. So for example, the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, and the regional development banks that would be maybe, for example, the Asian Development Bank. So the president will appoint U.S. executive directors to each of those locations, and then we staff the offices. So one of the cool things in working here, you wouldn't do this as a junior fellow right away, but if you came back as an international economist, you might be assigned to staff one of the multilateral development banks in, say, London, or even like in the Philippines, which is pretty neat. And then we also have attachés in U.S. embassies abroad. We have detailees across the government, we have technical advisors to foreign governments, and we have international economists and policy advisors. And the cool thing about the technical advisors too is that they actually go to foreign governments and help them put together similar treasury projects that we have here. And this is our organizational structure. So we have the secretary and the DEPSEC, as we call Wally, of the Treasury. And then we have the counselor to the secretary, the undersecretary for international affairs. So those two, so we're reporting pretty much to the undersecretary for international affairs, and below that, we have a few assistant secretaries. So one thing I really wanted to stress here with you is that if you were to come on board here as a junior fellow, you'd be assigned probably to one of these offices, like the Asia or the Europe office, or Africa and Middle East, or trade policy and technical assistance, all those offices. And although you're a junior fellow and you're right out of college, you can see how close you are in terms of the steps up to the assistant secretary or the undersecretary or even the secretary. So it's definitely not unusual for a junior fellow to be in a meeting with an assistant secretary or an undersecretary, or occasionally even the Secretary Yellen, which is kind of unique, I think, in the federal government, because although the US Treasury is very large, IA itself is only maybe 180 to 200 people. So you're really having an opportunity to make a difference in IA and to sort of, I guess, bat at a higher weight than you normally would as a junior fellow. And this is just the role of IA offices. So we stay up to date on relevant global economic and financial monetary issues. And we write a lot of analytical memos for senior officials, some of which wind up at the White House and often wind up at Secretary Yellen's office. We develop treasury policy. We do policy memos. We review, analyze, and advise on policies and project proposals. And we work with interagencies on broader U.S. government policy. Treasury is often the lead on financial issues with other government agencies. And this is very cool. We engage in diplomacy. We negotiate U.S. trade and investment agreements, and we prepare talking points and briefers for senior officials. Again, it's not unusual for a junior fellow to be attending a meeting at the IMF, for example, or the World Bank when they have their meetings here in DC, or even to travel quite a bit internationally. And now I'm going to turn the floor over to Ria, who is our current junior fellow.
Hi, everyone. So I can talk a little bit as to concrete examples of what junior fellows do in their time here at Treasury. So I work in the Office of the Multilateral Development Banks in development policy, and I specifically cover the Asian Development Bank. And what's cool about this office is the MDB office, it leads, the United States Treasury is the lead on MDB policy. So I get to go to the annual meetings as part of the United States delegation, which is a really great opportunity to get to know my coworkers better, and especially the lead of our delegation, who might be the assistant secretary or the deputy assistant secretary. You get to watch policy in action, diplomacy in action, as you sit in meetings with your counterparts from other countries, as well as the management of these international institutions. Another junior fellow, Morgan, she was in the trade office, and she helped to negotiate OECD guidelines to redirect export credit support away from fossil fuels and towards climate change mitigation and adaptation projects. She also got to travel to Paris frequently to attend these negotiation sessions, which was a very cool perk for her. And then lastly, Tara, she was a junior fellow in the MENA office, Middle East and North Africa. So the work that she did there is pretty representative of what the regional offices do, which is researching economic, energy, and geopolitical developments in their region, and representing Treasury in engagements with foreign ministries of finance and central banks. And so a lot of hardcore policy and economic analysis happens in the regional offices, and it's also a great opportunity to build relationships with the counterpart ministries of the governments that are in your portfolio. So each junior fellow will get a portfolio of a certain number of countries if they're in a regional office. To go over the Junior Fellows Program a little bit, I can start with an overview of what it is. It provides recent college graduates the opportunity to gain hands-on economic policymaking experience, which is very unusual, at least when I was looking for jobs. This kind of economics positions were very difficult to get as solely an undergraduate, and they were often only open to graduate students. So I think this is really unique in that sense. Fellows are brought in for 2 years, usually at the GS9 level, and they can be selected for a position in any of the regional or the functional offices. And then, as I said, it's a 2-year position. So after you, graduate from your junior fellowship, there's a variety of things that you can do. We've had people stay on at Treasury and become international economists and even deputy directors of their office. You can move into the front office and become an advisor to some of the principals at Treasury, or go into other government agencies or the Federal Reserve Bank, but stay in the public affairs realm. Others choose to move into the private sector, go to a bank in New York, or stay in the finance track, but in the private sector. And then many choose to pursue graduate studies in MPP, or law school is a fairly common option as well. I'd say Treasury IA is a name that carries a lot of weight and has high brand recognition. And I've learned that more and more as I tell people I work at Treasury and sort of getting their reaction. So I imagine it looks quite good on a resume.
It's true. Do you want to take this one, Sam?
Sure. So what makes a good fellow, I think, other than the strong focus on international, FSOC is not looking for that as much, but it doesn't hurt. I think these are pretty common, not just for IA, across Treasury too. So one, solid understanding of macroeconomic principles. You don't have to be an economics major. That doesn't have to necessarily be your passion or anything. But in order to be successful, you should at least be familiar with the realm. Like, that's just the world you're going to be working in. So if you have a basic understanding of that, a solid foundation, you can certainly build off of that. I think the keen interest in international affairs, obviously, I think if you're an IA, I will note, I'm not an IA. Anytime I do recruiting, IA always gets a ton of attention, so I think it's a very popular one. I will say, coming from the domestic finance side of things, we do see transitions between IA domestic finance. I think the skills you'll get doing an IA, fellowship, I think are highly transferable. You can do a great career in IA, but you can also, depending on what your opportunities and interests lead you, it will still give you a fantastic foundation for any non-IA ones as well. So I think I would view those as very highly transferable, skills. Strong written communication. I think it's important. Treasury lives and dies by memos. So the better you're able to really communicate well in the written word, and frankly, do that quickly too. There's not always endless time to prepare these things. Sometimes there's a very short runway. So this sort of fellowship will help you hone those skills that might be a little bit different from what a student is used to coming from an undergrad background, because I think that would be true for anyone. So this is a really good place to hone those skills. The capacity to work both independently and on teams, I think, is also a really critical one. No one really gets to decide, well, this is my preferred way, so I'm just going to do this. This is my preferred way. You'll be asked, there are big challenges before the US. There are big challenges for the Treasury, and the ability to do both well, functionally, and to frankly be able to pivot between those two fairly rapidly is going to be an important skill any junior fellow comes in and works with for that. And finally, after telling you, like, you need this, you need that, part of it is you really need to be committed to put up with all of that. So the interest in public policy and the commitment to public service, I think it's safe to say that people could go out and many times in private industry, get a higher paying job that might be less stressful. But we don't do that because we have this commitment to the American people, commitment to our communities, and really just want to hone in on that. This is a fantastic way to jumpstart that.
And I would just add along those lines too that, one of the reasons why we have the Junior Fellows Program is we really enjoy the opportunity to be with a younger group of people. So we really prize your opinion. It's surprising to be in a meeting and everybody will look and say, well, what do you think? And we really want you to speak up. We want to hear what you have to say.
Yeah, and I think just jumping off of that, I think I've been at Treasury for a long time. I've been working for a while. And you really need outside perspectives to come in and just like get away from kind of the jaded. We tried that 10 years ago, it didn't work, so let's never revisit it again. I think they bring a skill set that frankly, they're just coming up in a different time. And so, definitely a huge, plus. And I think the reality, when you look at the demographics of the government, I think was 8% of the federal government is under the age of 30. I think Treasury might be even worse than that.
Right.
So we just need people who are going to be able to, rise up and meet that challenge.
Okay, so I can speak to this a little bit on how to apply. So this will probably starting in August and September, we'll start to receive applications. And usually the folks who are applying are going into their senior year of undergrad. Not all of them, some of them have already graduated, but we're primarily looking for undergrads, and we're going to be hiring people who will start the following summer. So by October 30th, we'd ask you to send us a cover letter, a resume. There's a federal requirement that requires you to have 52 weeks of work experience relevant to the duties described. And you'll receive a flyer, which we can send out to the advisors. The students will receive a flyer with duties, and we would ask them to kind of tailor their resumes to that. We'll also need a copy of transcripts, unofficial, if they haven't graduated yet, and at least one letter of recommendation, two if they haven't. The applications are actually done by email. We ask them to include their start date, which again, we're hoping would be sometime in the spring or summer of 2024. We can only, and this is the federal government rule.
Hi all, apologies for the technical difficulties. We will get folks back as soon as we can. But you do have a great chance to post your questions while we wait for our colleagues to rejoin us. The joys of a Zoom life, as everyone knows, are that sometimes Zoom doesn't Zoom the way you need it to. I think we're on our way back. Again, I encourage all of you as we go, please feel free to put your questions in the chat. I see some great ones already, but once we get audio back up, we will be able to pass all of those along as soon as their presentation is done. And I will be sure to pose those questions to our speakers as soon as we can. I also want to take this opportunity to remind you of some of the other great webinars that are coming up. And from there, we can be sure to help share even more opportunities with you. I'm going to pause the recording until we're back. So if you're watching this on YouTube later, lots of exciting things will happen while we're on pause.
And then following that,
And then following that, we go into an interview process. Last year, I think we had about maybe 175 total applicants for junior fellows in IA, and we selected 12 people. So we've conducted the interviews primarily through Zoom. If you're local in DC, you're welcome to come in as well for an interview. And following that, we move into a matchmaking phase where we come up with the finalists, and then we match them with the offices that have availability for a junior fellow. And I also wanted to mention that usually in September and early October, we will do a few info sessions, which were very popular last year. They're webinars where we will have our current junior fellows will conduct the actual webinar, and participants will call in with questions and that sort of thing. So it was, I think they ranged about, I think the one we had about 150 people attending. And so it's been very, very popular. So with that, and again, I apologize for the technical difficulties, but with that, I think we could open it up to chat if you'd like.
Great, thank you, Kim. And I appreciate everybody's flexibility as we try to pass on this great information. We have a few questions, particularly about the expectations and criteria for what makes a great fellow. First, when you talk about familiarity with macroeconomics, the overarching question was how familiar and what do students need to have? Is it courses past intermediate macroeconomics? Should they have a number of econ courses even if they didn't major? How would students demonstrate that particular skill?
Okay, I'm going to let Rhea answer that question since she's our current junior fellow.
I'd say that having an economics major is not a requirement, but if you look at our current junior fellow class, everyone has an econ major except for one girl who was a philosophy major. So it's not a requirement, but I think it definitely helps. And I'd say the reason for that is because not every office requires the same level of macroeconomic understanding. So the office that I'm in doesn't do as much of the macro analysis that maybe some of the regional offices do. So you can interview for offices that are a better fit with your ability when it comes to economics, which is why it can vary. So a regional office probably won't accept someone who has less economic skills, but other offices definitely might.
And that's actually a great segue into my next question, which was Kim named a number of different regional offices. How deep does the regional knowledge need to be for a student in order to compete for those opportunities?
Some of the junior fellows go in with a background in that region. Many don't. I think Treasury IA values a generalist approach. Even when you are a full-time international economist in the building, you switch offices maybe every 2 to 5 years. So you don't need to have been that country or that region's expert for your entire undergraduate career. That's not the kind of like expertise. It's more the econ, the writing, that's more valued.
Yeah, and I would just add that, you know, as a junior fellow, we're not expecting you to be experts on regions at this point. We just are looking for some basic skills, and then we'll teach you a little bit as you go.
Always a good chance to learn and grow. I have 2 questions about the work experience. Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead. I have 2 questions about the work experience component. One is, how is that calculated? Does it have to be paid opportunities? How are internships treated? And then similarly, are there particular kinds of experiences that help students stand out in a positive way?
That's an excellent question. Yes, so paid experience, paid internships as well as unpaid internships work on volunteer counts. So, anything that's even, a little relevant to the position description is helpful. We did have one person apply. We laughed because she, we tried to get her through. She worked as a cabana person on the beach, but HR folks wouldn't count that. But a lot of other things do count. They actually add up the hours. They're looking at 52 weeks of 40 hours a week over the course of your life, pretty much, which I know for a junior fellow isn't that long, but for an undergrad. But yeah, internships certainly do count. and unpaid as well.
So is that something students should calculate or be ready to calculate when they apply?
Yes, yeah, they shouldn't. And we actually will suggest, and this will all be in the information that I send out to you, but we would, suggest that you actually put in like May, for an internship, for example, May 2023 through September 2024, 20 hours a week or 40 hours a week, and calculate it that way. So that it's easy for HR to actually look at it and say, oh yes, this person has the required number of hours.
And when students apply, do they typically apply with a federal style resume that would list those things, or a more general resume? Is it all done through USA Jobs? How is the application managed? Is it by email, I think?
Right, for this particular position, we do not use USA Jobs. We just use, and you do not need to send a federal government resume, just a general resume is fine. We would suggest though that it's better to have it be a little bit longer than shorter, because we want you to really expand on your experience within that resume. So rather than just say you worked at the Fed for for a summer, we want you to explain to us what your duties were and that sort of thing during that time.
That's great. And one of our colleagues was wondering, where will it be posted when it opens in August? Is it on Treasury's website, or where could they find the description then?
Yes, it will be on the Treasury website. We also have a LinkedIn site. And then hopefully we will be able to send out to all the advisors, some information which will be a little bit more specific that you can distribute to your students, which will explain exactly when to apply, how to apply, the email address, and all that sort of thing.
Wonderful. And folks, I promise as soon as I get it, I will share it with you, so it'll come straight to your inboxes. Another colleague was wondering, does it matter how long you have been a naturalized citizen to compete?
No, as long as you're a U.S. citizen, it doesn't matter.
And you talked a little bit about the competitive numbers for IA. For FSOC, are they similarly sized, 175 applicants and 12 accepted?
Their program was new last year, so I don't think that they had that number of applicants. I'm not very sure. If Sam, are you on the line?
I am on the line. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Oh, great. So we're not quite as big. Last year was the first year we went through this process. So we had roughly 50 applicants, so a little less, and it was competing for around 3 slots. After we did this, domestic finance also decided to take on some junior fellows too. And so they basically pulled from our applicant pool as well as getting their own applications. So I'm not sure how many are actually going to apply this year. We having only one data point for that, but I anticipate we'll probably take in total between FSOC and domestic finance around 6 junior fellows for that.
And when candidates apply, do they have to specify which office they want to work in? Or is it just a general application and you all say, oh, this would be better for IA compared to FSOC, et cetera?
So they are 2 separate application processes. We asked 2 different essay questions for that now.
And we have a question wondering what FSOC gets up to. Could you talk a little bit more about its special role in the Treasury Department?
Absolutely. So where the Secretariat is a council, supports the Financial Stability Oversight Council. So we basically do all sorts of things, including systemic risk monitoring, a lot of coordination between the different agencies. So I think that is key. We're here to respond and anticipate emerging risks to U.S. financial stability. That's a pretty big remit because, 1 week that might mean like the implications of the Ukrainian invasions on U.S. financial stability, to housing prices the next week, or SVB or a bank failure the next. So it's a lot of really different skill sets. We're not and I should say, we're not a huge office, like we're not trying to be a mini Fed or anything like that. We're going to be probably about just under 50 people in total. So a really key skill for people who work in APSOC is an interest in a lot of different things, a willingness to really be able to pivot. And this isn't bad or good, but if you're someone who's like, I want to like pick a project and really work very deeply on that for 6 months, APSOC's probably not going to be the place for you, because, you know, as things come in, you know, you have to respond to them. We don't have the luxury of telling the secretary like, well, we'll get to that later. It's just not for that. So.
And are there good ways you've seen students demonstrate that interest in having their fingers in lots of pies?
I think looking at their coursework and their internships, we really do recognize the fact that, you know, coming out of undergrad, it's not like you're going to have 10 years of experience. So frankly, a lot of it is even just talking about your interests. Like when you come in, if you're able to discuss with at least a little bit of curiosity, again, because they're undergrads, we don't expect them to have all the experience. So I think the people that we've been really impressed with when we've talked to them have been the ones who have, you know, just prepared, and even if they have more questions than answers, you know, coming in being like, hey, you know, I read about this, I'm curious about this. This is, you know, my area of interest, but I've also, you know, been curious about this other thing. I think really goes a long way, because that shows that they understand at minimum that there's going to just be a lot going on with FSOC, and to you know, just a demonstrated interest. I think that you know, a lot of this is not necessarily deep experience, it's just more demonstrated interest, frankly, that we're looking at for an undergrad candidate.
Same for IA.
Ria, we also had a question specifically for you. One of our colleagues was wondering what you feel are the 3 most important things you've learned in your role so far.
Sure, I'll say the first is when you are leaving undergrad, you're new to the workforce, you're new to federal government, and you're new to Treasury. So even just understanding who comes first, the undersecretary or the assistant secretary, takes mental energy that it takes for no one else. Can you still hear us? Okay, great. So it is really okay if the learning curve takes a long time, because you're drinking from the fire hose for maybe longer than you would hope for. And it's also okay to ask a lot of questions. So I think that's like one thing I learned was learning curve will take a while. I'd say maybe second is just understanding how policy is made. When I first entered, it was like, okay, someone is telling me that we have this position on XYZ issue, but where is that coming from? And how do I influence that? So being able to see between sets of meetings, how do we write talking points for our principal who will be leading that meeting? How do they deliver those talking points? What are the do-outs from that meeting? And then how do we move forward next step? So like watching the evolution of policy making. And then third, I think, is just like how to be in a collegiate atmosphere. I think Treasury is really cool because Treasury IA, because it's a very lean and small organization. So it's not, you get to know pretty much all of your colleagues in this building, which I think is really unusual for federal government. And we have lots of speaker events and social events that happen inside and outside of the building that are IA-wide, but then also just junior fellows, we choose to do things on our own as well. And so you get to know everyone, and it's a very collegiate atmosphere, which is really great.
I think at this point, we probably have about 20 junior fellows in IA. So it's a good cohort.
That's great. This is Ria, why they picked you to be the salesperson for the Junior Fellows program.
Exactly.
I'm curious whether fellows need a security clearance, and if so, how long that process usually takes.
Sure. So when the junior fellows apply, after the match with an office, and we go out and we make them an offer. Shortly after that, they'll receive something which we call an SF-86, an equip form, which is rather detailed and asks about, there's just a ton of questions in it, basically. And following that, our security office will review that and make a determination about whether or not that particular junior fellow can start with a waiver while their background investigation is running. So I would say probably 90% of the junior fellows are permitted to do that. The 1% who require a full background investigation, this is for a secret clearance, so that the timeline is not that bad. I think just today I heard that it was, 63 days. So if we're making an offer to you in March and we're hoping that you can start in June, it's really not that bad. We can usually get you on board pretty quickly. It's not always the case, but usually. So it's, you will have a secret clearance to be on board.
That's huge that the students can start without a clearance. I only know a few federal agencies that have that, so that's wonderful to hear.
Yeah.
I know we got a bit interrupted when looking at criteria and expectations, but one of our questions was whether master's level students can apply between their first and their second year of their degrees, or do you have to just be an undergrad?
Yeah, so master's students are welcome to apply. We do give preference though to undergrads. Just because the program's sort of designed to be a 2-year program between undergrad and grad school, or undergrad and the next steps in their careers. Just try to stick with that if we can.
That's great. And could you all please give one more recap of the application process and the timeline? I know we got a bit interrupted, so if you wouldn't mind.
Sorry about that. Yes, so basically October 30th would be the deadline for submitting applications. And you would send those to IA Fellows at treasury.gov. So it's IAFELLOWS at treasury.gov. I'm looking for a cover letter, a resume, at least one letter of reference, and transcripts, basically. And we need all that. Oh, and also you need to state in there that you're a US citizen and whether or not you're a veteran. And we would get all those things in by October 30th. We would acknowledge receipt. As those come in, then by October 30th, we will send out 2 essay questions to all the folks who submitted complete applications. And we would ask them, we usually give you about 10 days to reply to the essay questions. And then following that is when we would do the application review. We have a committee of about, I'd say, I think that maybe 14, somewhere between 14 and 18 people on the committee, 2 people at a time review each application. From there, we put together kind of a finalist list and we present those to the office directors who have openings for junior fellows. And then they go out and do the personal interviews with the junior fellow. So.
I will, just one little thing is for the FSOC fellowship, we follow almost exactly the same process, although it is emailed to the FSOC recruitment if you're applying to that one.
Thank you both so much. You mentioned briefly that students are paid at a GS9 level. For those of us who don't live and die the general services scale, could you give us a broad sense of what a GS9 salary level is?
So you can look it up online and it'll tell you what the scale is. I think it starts at 60,000.
I can tell you in just a minute. Now, when you look at the pay scale for the federal government, you have to keep in mind that you're looking for a DC locality pay. So we pay more in DC and New York than we would in, Iowa or someplace. Let me see. I know I have it on my phone here.
So it's 64,957 DC at a GS9 step 1.
Thank you, Sam.
No problem.
Which is not too shabby for an undergrad. That's, never mind. And I was also curious, one of the questions we get a lot recently is whether employers are using AI to evaluate applications or if they are using software to determine whether applications were co-written with AI. and what that might mean for students, whether that's running it through Grammarly, asking ChatGPT to write your essays. Does Treasury have a position on this yet? And if so, could you share it with us?
Yeah, in fact, we have a recruiting committee, as I briefly mentioned, who screens both the junior fellows and the international economists. And we, up until now, we've been kind of doing our best sort of ad hoc to check for that. But we're actually looking at possibly getting a program that we can run to determine that. And some of it's been kind of obvious. And well, one of the things too is that if your application, we follow up the application with a pretty intensive interview. And if you can't answer the questions in the interview, and you know, we can kind of get a feeling that maybe you made some stuff up. Yeah.
And the software that you're looking at, would that be able to distinguish between spell check and grammar check programs and actual composition programs, or is it commonly the same
I would
level
hope
of analysis?
so. I can't speak to that exactly, but I would certainly hope so. I mean, you need to use spell check for sure.
We hope. If you're watching this, please use spell check. Very basic
Right,
bit of
yeah,
advice.
don't send an essay with typos. No.
So I'm not seeing any other questions from my colleagues, but I do invite you to put some more in the chat. My last question for both FSOC and IA is broadly, what helps with all of those cover letters and all of those essays for students to stand out in a positive way? You talked about a call to public service. Are there good ways for them to show that rather than just simply writing, I have a call to public service? Things that really help candidates rise to the top and get those interviews.
What do you think? I would say, I guess that you could judge that a little bit by their experience and know, have they done any volunteer work? Have they done internships? I know that internships definitely count for a lot with us. So if you've done internships in the public service, I think that would count. And just, we'll have people that will write and really explain their background, what their course, that they have relevant courses that led them to apply to this position. There's probably, what do you think, Sam?
I agree with that. I think also, again, because these are coming out of undergrad, we can't look to a decade of service. So I think even if they don't necessarily have like 5,000 hours of doing something, I definitely agree being able to really engage with the topic. Like, can you go beyond saying like, I think public service is important? Like, talking about, this is what inspires me about public service. This is why I want to go into it. And to, make it personal to them, like, why are they interested in it? And ideally that is reflected in, the classes they take, the volunteers that they've done. I think we at FSOC have really talked about the fact that we don't want to just select people that have, the grandest internships, because frankly, not everyone can do that. Like, part of that is access. Part of that is, people aren't always going to have the ability to just take the whole summer to do a full-time internship somewhere for no pay. So we have tried to really think about how not to penalize people for not being in those positions, to be able to do that. And I think, part of that is really just going to be like, an individual student's passion about that. Can they talk about why they've gotten there? And we're really looking at, and the cover letter is really their opportunity to do that. And I think, especially if they're in a position where they're like, hey, I don't have 5 different internships of doing like free internships over the course of my career, I think that's a great place to talk about that and be like, I couldn't do this. I was doing this instead, but this is, what drives me. And sometimes they're directly related for that. So I just really encourage people to, do talk about that.
I would
Yeah.
also,
Go ahead.
I would also just jump in and add that I think when you're applying to the IA fellowship, and this is just from an applicant's perspective, because Treasury IA does literally everything around the world that's related to, international economics, and you're not applying to a specific office, it can be hard to figure out how you want to tailor your experiences in your cover letter to that position. especially because you don't even know which offices would be hiring that cycle. So like a lot of my experience was in MENA. I talked about that a ton. The MENA office wasn't even hiring that cycle. So I think it helps if students talk about what they've done, and think less about tailoring it to a specific office or to a specific region or topical area, because it's just, you don't know if that office is going to be open, and you want to leave open the possibility for you to do work that's like adjacent to that maybe.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you can do a little bit of research on international affairs or an FSOC and refer back to that in your cover letter, it shows us that, you're motivated a little bit. You can always go to Treasury's website and do a little bit of research.
That's great advice. Thanks to all three of you. I'm also curious about things like customer service, retail positions, those sorts of jobs that students often think don't count, but can also have a lot of transferable skills. Are those things that you look for or value in the process?
Yeah, we'll make it's the HR, there's an HR division who looks at all this stuff and comes back and says, well, this person doesn't have 52 weeks. And then we will go and we'll argue with them as and fight for the junior fellow if it's someone who we want, and argue that, look, that was retail experience, but they also had, the customer service angle, or they were managing part of the budget or different things. So we had one guy I remember who, worked in his dad's grocery store for a number of years, and he couldn't afford, to go and do an unpaid internship in DC, obviously. But that was also, as far as we were concerned, that showed a lot of initiative.
One other question, whether simulated experiences like on Forage show what a student has done, even if it's not an official internship or a job. And those can be great ways for low-income or first-gen students to get some experience and exposure. Do those count?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I think we would probably consider that as like a certain amount of training. I don't necessarily think that HR would allow that to be counted as work itself, but it could go towards meeting minimum qualifications type of things, depending on what it is.
And also even writing for the school newspaper as an example, joining different clubs on campus. So yeah, all of that would count.
Those are all great pieces of advice. Thank you. I'm not seeing any more questions in the chat, so I want to extend a very hearty thanks to our speakers from Treasury, as well as to our advisors. We'll share a recording of the session, as well as when I get them, the slides. And when Treasury opens the call for applications, I will make sure that you all have it so that you can share this wonderful opportunity with your students. Thank you all so much for joining us today. We hope you will also be a part of our webinars later in July and in August, and be a continuingly active member of the PISA network. Thank you again so much to Kim and Ria and Sam for all of your great insights and advice. Have a great day, everybody.
Thank you for joining.